Oh, I like that. Hi, guys. I'm going to just open up the meeting. This is the Community Development Committee meeting. Roll call shows that Tom is here, Lori Osher is here, Councillor Gardner is here, Councillor Grenier is here, Councillor Wingard is here, and I am here, but I'm going to turn this over to Councillor Grenier because he is the chair of the committee.
Yeah, so Sophie, is this the only item on here tonight? Because I didn't get an agenda, so.
We didn't.
Everybody got an agenda. It's in the drive. I sent it to you. It has one item on it and a town manager's report. I have two important items in the manager's report that I'd like to get to if we can.
Okay.
I actually looked in the drive and didn't find it.
Okay, I didn't put it in the drive. I never said that.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I did. I'm sorry.
Great. So, first I want to thank Councillor Gardner for taking over while I was not able to last week. With the continuation of the DEI, moving this forward, I think the hope tonight is to get to a space where we can move this forward so the staff has a clear a vision of what we're expecting. I think everybody, unless you had photo ops, had an opportunity to kind of like answer the questionnaire that was out there and stuff like that. So I want to kind of not rehash or not rehash, but bring up new things because we all had an opportunity to answer those questions to provide to Sophie so we could get this thing moving forward. So so from here, Sophie, do I just hand this off to you to kind of do a continuation of this, or?
Here, I thought I handed it off to you.
Just hand it back and forth.
I could be completely wrong, and I do not in any way, shape, or form want to drive this process. This should be council's process. My hope today was that I would be able to walk away with two things. First is enough understanding of council's desires with regard to a JEDI committee or DEI committee, that I could draft a charge so that you guys could actually respond to words on a page as opposed to just amorphous ideas. And then the second thing I was hoping was that I could get enough understanding of your goals and objectives and where you'd like to drive our plan that I could work with staff to, again, draft the plan for you to give feedback and change. I just think council is set up to is kind of designed to respond to things as opposed to have 7 people just working without product in front of you. Those were my goals. Just because they're my goals doesn't mean they're the right goals or what you want to do. But if I was looking for a starting point, it would be kind of looking at that first set of questions where council had indicated they were interested in forming a committee. And those questions kind of took you through what would be in a charge. So the first one is, if we're going to form a committee, what would that overarching purpose be? What is it there for?
So I know that everybody had an opportunity to kind of put their input on that. And so let's kind of open up a discussion on that and try to get everybody's thoughts on what you read and what you think. I don't know if anybody wants to open it up with your thoughts.
Terry, do you think it would be helpful for us to like take the questionnaire document and kind of move through it to talk about each item? Because I think we might be able to narrow down the specifics of like a charge and all of the kind of, you know, moving parts of how this might work.
Yeah, I'm trying to like I'm on my iPad, so I'm trying to kind of like navigate this with 2 different things.
Me too.
Do you want me to like start off by reading?
Yeah. What could you please help me with that? That'd be greatly appreciated.
I've got the PDF right here. So the first item that we responded to in the questionnaire was about the committee's overarching purpose, sort of the why of the existence of the committee in terms of what each each individual counselor that answered. For the folks playing at home, we took, some time to review all of the materials that we had and then responded to a questionnaire that Sophie developed regarding kind of like, how do we come about a charge? So the first thing was sort of a broad question about what we see as this committee's overarching purpose. If folks want to jump in there.
So Megan and Terry, when I look at the three responses here, they seem a little different. Like response 1 is sort of forward looking, right? Response 2 is kind of, the purpose of the JEDI committee would be to improve practice and provide feedback to the town on issues as we go forward. The second one seems to think about, is more aspirational, to assist in the promotion of justice and equity. And the third one is sort of righting the wrongs of the past, to review policies and practices that we may not have either drafted or implemented correctly in accordance with DEI goals or JEDI goals. I'm not sure that those are.
Hey, Jeff, can I just interrupt you just for one quick
Yeah.
second? Because that third one is mine and that was not my intent at all.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is I think they're quite complementary, really, and they could very easily be sort of, put together so that we have a statement that reflects the aspirations of the council to do great work, in this field, and also to review our ongoing practices and our upcoming practices or forward-going practices, right? However, that was my thought, right? Is that, right, when we start off, right, we take the big step forward and then we can kind of like get all the nuts and bolts out of the way.
Yeah, and by that I only meant that I wasn't solely thinking about reviewing things that have already been done, although that shouldn't be off the table, but just as I think what I was trying to get at is that this is potentially an asset and a resource to the town, both council and staff, in terms of developing policy and approaches to service delivery that with a DEI lens that we might be missing, or what might be, we are missing. So, but yes, reviewing things from the past also could be on the table there. But yes, forward thinking as well.
Great.
So I thought Jeff's observation was a very good one. I also thought that the three items that were submitted were quite complementary, and I wouldn't be surprised if they could be nicely woven together into a charge.
Lori,
Mhm.
is Lori with us?
She was. Yeah.
Lori, do you have anything to add? You're on mute, by the way.
Do I have anything to add? I'm really excited that we're talking about this. I thought people gave very good input, and I agree with Sophie that we tend to work well when we have a proposal in front of us. And so this idea of us all coming up with how we can make this charge is a little awkward compared to the way we usually do things. And we also had a DEI ad hoc or a committee that helped us. So I guess that wasn't part of their charge to make this description of what the committee would be. So I'm glad we're talking about it, and I liked people's suggestions.
Great, Cheryl. Did I already-
I like the reflex. I am actually what Jeff said. I'm going to have to second that because I do see that all three of those is more comprehensive and with the correct language, with the correct verbs. I think that a charge can be woven into that, into those three suggestions as well. And that was one of my concerns was what are they going to do? so we've got something a little bit more to work with.
So blending these together seems to be a common statement.
Yeah,
with a little wordsmithing.
yeah, I think that's totally Doable, is doable a word?
Doable is a word.
So, yeah, so where do we go with who's gonna wordsmith this? And
Oh, I see it as my job to at least throw something together. Meg will change it because she's really good at that. You'll all love it and have ideas, and we'll go back and forth for a little bit, and then we'll adopt something. Then you'll adopt something.
Great idea.
Sounds good.
I just got voluntold, didn't I? I'm happy to be voluntold for anything.
I love that word.
Work on it though. I'll do more than just bullet points.
Okay, so we have that. So let's move on to that next point, which is what are the committee's specific goals and objectives? There's a lot here for a bunch of good ideas. So let's start that discussion on the what.
For me on some of these questions, it was fun to read the answers because I think we interpreted the questions slightly differently. And I think this is one of those examples, but that's a good thing because it brought in more ideas to kind of expand the conversation a little bit. So when I read, are there specific deliverables, I was thinking about like, whether that's like reporting to council or how the committee interacts with council. So like that was me down towards the bottom talking about, briefings or letters or something. But I really was, I was interested in the first answer there about wanting to receive feedback on these specific bullet pointed items. And I think that all of those are really important. So for the committee to give feedback on specific incidents related to DEI issues that occur in Orono, any deficiencies in the provision of services that may be due to DEI issues, recommendations for ongoing training that committee members feel is important, and recommendations for language to ordinances and regulations that promote JEDI goals. So although I was thinking of it in a more mechanics way of like, oh, what's the deliverable? I guess, certain reports to council, but these are more specific and more fine-tuned, and I liked those.
The one thing that I would ask council to think about just a little bit, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, let me just look real quick. So, and I think this kind of goes with the next piece too. I think that looking at overarching policy that council would normally enact or be responsible for, and looking at service level and as a policy matter, what services we're delivering them or how we deliver them as policy makes perfect sense. This is written in a way that I think could be construed to say complaints against individual employees, and that would really create a due process issue for us. The other thing I would want to just make sure, and again, this isn't saying you can't do it. I'm not telling you can't do anything, but I would also want to make sure that we were very clear that there is a place where complaints and concerns and incidents get reported internally to go through the internal process. So that's the only thing that made me a little nervous here was the delineation between service delivery and personnel, because I am concerned that creating a board that deals with complaints, both from a risk management perspective and a due process for employees perspective, could be problematic. And you might want to be kind of careful.
Yes, Sophie, I totally agree with that. And when I read like item D on that list of recommendation, or B, deficiencies in provisions of service that may be due to DEI issues, I'm thinking more like hypothetical scenario. We're talking about trash collection in a specific part of town, and we are trying to move forward with what we think is the good idea for addressing this problem. And we're able to get feedback that, you know what, if you do that, these could be unintended consequences where we're not delivering services equitably across town. That's more how I was thinking of it, not complaints about specific employees or specific departments, but more just when we're trying to formulate policy that relates to service delivery, are we missing something?
I think, and I think that that is totally a legitimate thing for people to look at. I think the mechanical question I would have for you is when you talk about when we think about policies or recommendation on language to ordinances and regulations, how do you envision that working? So let's just say we're talking about trash delivery, or we're thinking about implementing a pay-as-you-throw, which we're not, but if we were. How would that, is it a matter of people that are on this committee would be engaged in the town and red flag something or yellow flag something to say, wait a minute, I think we should talk about that as a Jedi group? Is it something that mechanically every policy and every ordinance would go through this committee before it was approved? Are you going to kind of highlight areas that you think are within this group's domain, so that it be kind of like with the planning board? Not every ordinance goes to the planning board, but we know all land use ordinances go to the planning board.
Well,
how do you get things in front of them?
When I was thinking of these bullet points, what I was thinking is that this committee needs to have some, it is answerable to the council, but it needs to have some autonomy from council. So we don't necessarily need to feed them every item that we're going to discuss, but we should provide this committee with a list of items that, maybe our workflow list or something like that, so that the committee itself can decide which items they want to take up, which may be a concern to people on that. Because I don't want to say to somebody, this isn't the purview of the Jedi committee, from my perspective as a privileged white guy, when it really is an issue that they want to talk about. But nor do I want to just burden this committee with every piece of work that council does. Right, that might not be necessary. So they should be able to decide, what they're interested in.
Would there be some language that, as opposed to this committee, almost like an as-needed committee? So when staff and council, when this is an issue, an equity issue, or a diversity issue, when they feel that it needs another set of eyes, or there's a question about whether this particular policy is not serving a vulnerable population, to run it past the committee, as opposed to feeding the committee every single thing, like what Jeff said. So when staff sees or needs some advice, when I'm saying staff, I'm saying departments or council, when we say, you know what, maybe this might be a good place for the committee to provide some feedback or some input.
And here I was really hoping it would be a little bit more structured so that it couldn't come back that we were going around the committee if we didn't see that piece. I like the idea of, we already do a planning list, we do a workflow list. It would be, I think, good for people to have a heads up, as opposed, so that we can work it into our process. So often we're working with multiple stakeholders, and that timing is important for council and other stakeholders. So if they knew it was coming and could flag it, we could work that into our timeline. I kind of like that idea, but again, I'm not on council.
I really, really like both of those suggestions. And I think that I'm envisioning almost like a three-pronged approach here. One is that we do develop a work plan, and we should provide that to the committee so that they kind of can see what we're working on, and they can flag items that they think they might like to be involved in or know more about or be part of that process. We should probably also have a mechanism where council can refer something to them. For example, if we are having that debate about trash collection and somebody says, hey, you know what? I feel like we don't have enough information. So can we refer this to the JEDI committee and then bring it back, after they've had a chance to talk about it. And then finally, just to answer that kind of question or concern about like, are we feeding them every single thing that we're doing and like asking them to weigh in? Hopefully that's what the toolkit would be used for. So if we're going to finish developing and then adopting the toolkit that we have a draft of, that provides us and staff with a mechanism to make sure that we are actively, intentionally using a DEI lens to look at policies and operational concerns on our own as we're going through, just as part of the routine process of bringing an item forward through the council process.
Good point.
Lori?
Yes.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you for asking. I like the idea that the group would meet regularly, whether or not we've given them a particular charge. I do think that it's important if we have something we would like to know from them that we would refer it to them. But I like the idea that the group would meet regularly and would be somewhat autonomous of us. We give them a charge and then they let us know what they've heard from the community and what they've learned from trying to do the best to meet our needs of what our charge was.
Great. Tom, did you have anything to add?
I'm still thinking about how we address this concern that Sophie first brought up about making sure that we're not getting into the review of individual performance of employees. And I think you were focused, Sophie, on that item B, any deficiencies in the provision of services. And I'm just wondering if there's a way of reworking that phrase, or it really focuses on maybe gaps in services or some language that deficiency to me speaks more personnel than it does inadequacy of service.
As long as I know the council agrees with my perspective, I can definitely find language there that kind of threads that needle.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that perspective.
That was exactly where I was going also, because I think that's one of those things, as we've seen in the past, when you start kind of going after individuals, it's not right, and it should not be right. And my big concern is, as always, is to protect our staff from that possibility of somebody singling them out for something they may not agree with. So like Tom said, figuring out the right wording to make it so it doesn't apply specifically to an individual or department or any personnel type stuff.
Yeah, and beyond ethical concerns, there are legal concerns. I mean,
Right.
They have a right to due process, as Sophie pointed out.
Right.
Yep.
Lori?
So I have mentioned to you guys, or not to all of you, some of you were not in the town council when I wrote how I have had workplace experiences that were unpleasant based on the discrimination by other employees in the same workplace against me. And I know that the people who are doing their best to protect the rights of those who, at that point when the person who feels uncomfortable says they're uncomfortable about the behavior of another person, that one of the things to do is to protect the rights of the people who are the accused. However, it really feels, when you're the person who's being discriminated against, like the cards are all stacked against you. And this whole process, I really appreciate everyone being very focused on how to make this committee and frame it, but it's, as they say, triggering for me. This whole process has been very challenging for me, because I don't have a lot of faith that we as a government agency or as a workplace really will end up creating a process that protects people. Because unfortunately, the way our culture has been, our culture, that's culture writ large, not just American culture or Orono culture, is to often assume that someone who's complaining of discomfort is making a big deal out of nothing. And the goals have often been for people to not speak out. And so it takes a lot. You know, it took over 60 some women to saying that Bill Cosby had drugged them for him to actually be taken to task in the press and the courts. So anyway, that's what I appreciate, that you're to workplace and we have to protect workers' rights. But I also, I'm so sure that that when we create this committee, we need to allow them to work in a way that makes the people's discomfort have a place to be heard, and they work as allies to people who feel uncomfortable. And so that's really important to me.
Thank you. Sophie? You had nothing to add to that?
No, nothing.
Okay. So moving from here, so what is the general consensus of I think we're all kind of in agreement with kind of how that's laid out. If I can go back to that. With the exception of the wording on I'm struggling with this here. I just think we're in agreement with pretty much all of the stuff of just making sure that we write it in a manner that does not put a staff member at risk. If I'm off base on this, could somebody please let me know that I'm off? So Sophie is
I have enough for a draft there, and then you can tweak it.
And Sophie,
Okay, great.
as we get closer, I just have a question for Sophie. As we get closer to this on issues like personnel and things like that, this will be run past our town attorney, correct? To make sure that that we are okay, and that my concern.
It depends on how close you get. If
Okay.
you get really close, then I'll run it by the town attorney.
Make
If you
sure that-
stay with
yeah.
a clear division the way we
Well-
have here, then I don't think we need to, but.
Okay, my concern is also when you're talking about issues of people and, you know, sensitive issues and things like that, is confidentiality and the way things spread around the town. And so if anyone gets put in a compromised position because of this, then there might be some liability involved as well in those instances, not in anything else. But was just listening to Lori and thinking that maybe there might be something might come up if there are some sensitivity issues.
So personnel management aside, right? Because I can't imagine that council would want an outside committee to engage in personnel management when it doesn't engage in personnel management.
Mm-mm.
However, I think in a more, depending on who is on the committee, I think one role that the committee could absolutely have is that of, for lack of a better term, ambassador, meaning you have a group of people who are connected in various ways with groups of historically marginalized folks. And maybe it is not easy to make a complaint that needs to be made. Instead of taking the complaint at the committee, I would see the avenue being committee person should understand what the town's complaint process is and could help make the connection, much like counselors do. So I mean, it's always good to make friends that can help, but I guess I would see that as the role, not to create a secondary process.
Right.
That makes sense. So we've got enough on that. So let's move on to the next item. Are there areas of or items that council wants to clarify are expressly not within the charge?
Terry, did you want to go through 2, 3, 4, and 5 of number of B? Or
Oh,
we,
Oh, I thought we had already gone to, I'm sorry.
I don't know. If we need to.
Well, I think Sophie had enough information to kind of draft something based on the conversation, unless somebody feels differently.
Okay.
We good? Okay, so we'll move on then to, are there areas of or items that council wants to clarify are expressly not within the charge? There were 2 items that were written on that. Comments, thoughts?
Well, both comments are pretty close to each other, and I think we've certainly agreed that we don't want them to have operational authority. I'm not sure whether that goes back to the charge.
I think all of this folds into a charge, kind of the multi-layered charge like we've done for other groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that has been part of the conversation all along, and I agree with both of these items that, you know, the committee wouldn't have operational authority over any town employee, that it's an advisory committee, it doesn't speak for the town. It's not in a position of oversight over staff or council. It, you know, I mean, I feel like that's appropriate.
Yep.
Mhm.
I do also.
And
Any,
and I was going to say too, and recommendations are recommendations. They're not directives.
Right.
correct. Everybody okay with this one?
Yep.
Okay, let's move on here to C. Who will serve on the committee? How will they be chosen? How long will they serve? And how will new members be selected? This one had a lot of thought.
It had a lot of thoughts, but I think they were kind of almost all the same.
Yeah.
It seems like the sweet spot is between 5 and 10. I think there was a between 5 and 10, there was a 7, and there was a no more than 10. In terms of how they'll be chosen, there seemed to be kind of a similar feeling to how the ad hoc committee was chosen, which was a combination of putting out a call to the community for applications that council reviewed, and also individual counselors or staff with personal connections reaching out to specific people to ask them to apply, at which point council reviews the applications and then appoints members to the board. Many people talked about having 1 to 3 year terms or 2-year terms, and then how to stagger them initially so that we are not seeing a complete turnover every time. There was one comment, so all of that seems pretty similar across the comments to me. I guess the only thing, and these aren't competing or clashing comments at all, but there was a little bit of discussion about encouraging the membership to be diverse in age, gender, race, ethnicity, mental health, physical ability, religion, socioeconomic status, type of residence, and then making sure, and then another comment about there shouldn't be a quota of any particular identities on the board, and I agree with that as well. I think the only thing was there was just one comment about who should be eligible, and I think there was this is the only point of contention in all of the feedback here, is one comment said only Orono residents should be eligible, and another comment said members should live, own a business, or work at / attend a school within the town of Orono. So I guess that probably should be our main point of discussion for this, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. So what are the thoughts on that? Lori?
Well, for the original committee, we did, some of the people on the original committee who are so valuable in developing the report that they made for us did not fit in those categories. And so I guess I think that those, just as we did with the tree board, we ended up saying that we just needed people who knew a lot about trees, and they didn't necessarily have to live in Orono. That was changed since I've been on the council, because we really needed people who knew about trees, not where they lived. And so in the same way, I think limiting it to people who, although we have so many wise and thoughtful people and people who might represent diversity that live or work in Orono, they may not be available at the time that we're looking for a new person to be on this committee. And so I think that that's, greater Bangor area seems like that would be more reasonable.
I'd feel much more comfortable with committee members who have a strong connection to Orono. I was thinking strictly Orono residents, but I like the idea of people who work in Orono or own a business in Orono being a possibility. But I guess I would personally not be comfortable opening it up to the greater Bangor area necessarily.
Well, I've been, since I've been on the council, trying to recruit a member of the Penobscot Nation to run for council, and I haven't been able to get someone, even though we have members in the nation that live in Orono. And several things on the summary report discussed tribal relations, and so there's an example of whether it's the greater Bangor area, maybe someone who's from Indian Island, and that's not Orono, we had someone who worked for the school board for the school system in Bangor, but did their graduate work at Orono and lives in Old Town, and she was certainly an asset to the committee that we had. So I guess I still maintain that the greater area than our town is because our town connects with people in the greater area, specifically Native people, but also there may be others.
I'm going to weigh into. Go ahead, Megan. It's okay.
I was going to say, I feel very strongly that, as Tom said, the person should have a strong connection to Orono. I would not want to seat someone on the committee who may have a wealth of experience, but they are, they're from a different community and they have no tie to this particular community or this particular town. I think that we could probably find a compromise by saying that preference is given to people who live, work, or attend school in Orono or own a business in Orono, but that we should have something on the application that would provide an alternative means for someone to explain what their connection is to the community, and that we could consider that. Because when I look at the ad hoc committee, almost when you say like live, work, go to school, own a business in Orono, almost everybody on that committee met that requirement except maybe Dana. And I think that if we had a part of the application that said explain your relationship to Orono or your tie to this community, then there could just be a discussion of like how I feel connected to Orono, and that would allow us to consider that as well.
And I'm going to echo that too, Megan. And so my thinking is I'm much more interested in having Orono residents because they live here, they play here, they raise their kids here, they vote here, they're here. Business owners are here as well. But I grew up in Bangor. I couldn't even imagine being on a committee in Bangor and having oversight over Bangor's council when it's not a place that I vote, it's not a place that my kids go to school, it's not where my friends are. But I grew up there. So I think that this is an Orono council, this is an Orono, people who live here, shop here, go to school here, eat here, go to restaurants. I mean, they're integrated into the community, and are much more sensitive, I think, to community needs. And so I'm gonna stick with Orono residents. I would be swayed by someone who owned a business here, maybe. But going to the University of Maine for me is not enough of a criteria unless they live in Orono.
Great.
Yeah, Sharon, I
So,
guess oh, sorry.
no, go.
I guess I'm only thinking of, like, for example, I took Ella to see the International Dance Festival this weekend, and I'm thinking about, like, what about the grad student that's gone here for years and is part of this community in a meaningful way, but maybe they live across the town line in Old Town, and but their voice could be really important on something like this. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out an opportunity for people who, despite their address, might actually really be very connected to this community.
Well, I think, Megan, your idea of vetting that first, on an application and vetting it is appropriate.
Yeah, so my thought was kind of like, as we had this conversation, was more like, is there like a preference, if you want to call it that way, on somebody who's an actual resident that lives here? Those being at the front, and then as I thought about it, be like going, then you kind of graduate it down towards the spots of like the other individuals, as you were saying, that have the connections and what that. But I think, Meg, you actually said that probably the best way of putting it is that having some kind of segment within that application that says, what is your connection, what, how do you fit in within our community? And then as we go beyond those individuals, because what if we don't have enough people that want to be on that committee that are actually Orono based individuals? Where do we go from there? So what do you guys think? Do you think for Sophie to move forward?
Can I tell you where I would be if you said nothing more? My suggestion back to you would be that we actually craft an application that's a little bit different than other volunteer roles. And we ask people why they want to be on the committee, what experience or skills they bring to the committee, and wow, this might not actually be that much different than our current application. But then those applications would flow to council and you could weigh them. I am not talking about the ad hoc committee, but just in general, I could see that you might get people even from the community that were very excited and passionate about the national theme and wanting to do national things. Whereas the council's majority has said in the past, they really want to be focused on what's best for Orono and Orono size this. So I'm not sure it's where somebody lives, but rather what they would bring to it. And I think if council could, look at that and compare and contrast and really pay attention to the committee selection process, and maybe take a couple of counselors that would make some recommendations, but bring it to a committee so everybody could have a voice. I think that could be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
And just from a procedural standpoint, I know that we have somebody with their virtual hand up in the audience. I don't know how you want to deal with that, Terry, and where you're on a iPad, you probably wouldn't be able to see that.
Yeah, and usually on my committees, unless it's, these are kind of like just a workshop thing, so I typically don't even look at those unless people want to. But as a committee chair, I typically kind of in these forums, if they want to send in a question, fine, but yeah. So we're good with that, Sophie? Yeah.
So I'll attach the committee application, and if that works for folks, great. And if it doesn't, then we can revisit this language and talk about it again.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Trying to figure out where we're at. This iPad is giving me, what letter are we on now?
We're on D.
Yeah, we're on how the committee will function.
Okay, great.
Who and when does it report to the town council? How is it staffed? Does staff have an active or passive role with the committee?
Great. So we have 3 responses on that. So let's start this discussion. Any thoughts from anybody here?
Well, I saw I saw a role for a council representative as a liaison member to the committee. And I mentioned that up in the comment I made on the previous item. I didn't know whether it should be a council member or a senior staff member, but I think just in terms of facilitating the committee's work, not necessarily being a decision maker on the committee, because we don't want that. I don't want that anyway. But I did think it was important that they be staffed in some way, just as our planning board is staffed.
Every committee that we have has an assigned staff person to it. And for this, I would assume that the assigned staff person would be the town manager unless otherwise directed by the town council. And these will be, they have to be public meetings. If you're creating this committee,
Mhm.
they are public meetings regardless of who's on them.
I wonder if, and you may not see that there's a conflict, but I wonder if having somebody other than the person who is town manager be the staff liaison, because if you're the chief civil rights officer of the town,
Mhm.
and this is a committee that is discussing those issues and potentially bringing issues back to council, that may alter the town manager's charge as civil rights officer.
So,
I think it may be more helpful it may be, the assistant town manager might, from a structural point of view, be a more relevant person.
so, every committee that I staff with council can potentially change my job,
Mhm.
every single one of them. When you think about this work, along with being the civil rights person, I am the person that directs staff. And unlike other communities where the assistant manager is a subset of the manager, here, that is not really how it works. My assistant has a whole bevy of technical work that she does, and I am charged with doing the people work. I'm also the HR person. So when you start talking about what you can and can't do, that kind of is part of it. Ultimately, council gets to decide what council wants to do. That's the beauty of being an elected official. In this, but even like for planning board, as an example, I choose who is gonna serve on the planning board. I could go sit on the planning board and staff the planning board. I choose not to because there's technical expertise that needs to happen there. And so if that becomes the litmus test, then I wouldn't be able to serve on just about any staff, just about any committee.
I just think this committee is unique. The presence of a counselor or a staff member on a committee like this has the potential to have a chilling effect on the discussions of that, on the internal discussions of that committee, because they are inevitably going to discuss issues that they feel may be injustices committed by either the council or the town. So if you are the arbiter for all civil rights stuff in the town, and we want to facilitate a free and open discussion among members of the committee, this has nothing to do with Sophie as an individual, but this
Oh, I
has.
don't take it that way.
This is just like the idea that if the manager is the civil rights officer and has the potential to, making decisions that members of this committee may not agree with at some point,
Mhm.
right? Then having that person also sit on the committee can have potentially a really sort of,
But wouldn't you want that person to be the closest to being educated to do things the right way as
I
they
certainly,
perceive it?
I certainly do, but we just said the charge of this committee is not to educate, it's to recommend the education to the staff, right? I mean, this committee is not conducting education for counselor staff itself.
No,
So,
I think, so when I go back to the ad hoc committee and I think about the things that went well and the things that
Mhm.
made it kind of a bumpy ride, I think that lack of connection to staff created a disconnect that was counterproductive to moving smoothly. And when I look at the city of Bangor, that is staffed by the assistant city manager, who is the HR person and civil rights and oversees all of the HR department and does a lot of the same things that I do here. And I see it as an interwoven committee that they have in Bangor where staff are bringing things and talking to folks. It would be I guess when I vision this, not my committee, but when I vision it, I see it not as an us and them any more than I see bringing policies or practices to town council and town council saying, no, I don't want to do it that way, Sophie. We want to do it a different way. And so the team that we build and the rapport that we build allows us to move in productive ways and to open viewpoints. But feeling like we are a team, even though it's a stratified team, and this, I wouldn't see any committee being any different. I wouldn't lead a committee. That's not what I do with council committees. But I think we're asking staff, regardless of how you frame it, either in the way that they approach their day-to-day work, or in the services that we provide, or in the recommendations that we bring forward on an ongoing basis to council. We're asking them to grow and to stretch and to look at the way we do things differently. We ask them to do that about a lot of things. I think this is important. I think DEI is important, but I think that to disconnect it from staff is counterproductive. And I hear what you're saying. And I think the way to make people feel comfortable is all in how you approach it from the very beginning. And staff is supposed to be a blank slate in many ways. And but I think allowing a narrative to be spun that is completely the antithesis of what we do operationally or how we function is counterproductive to getting people to move forward.
no, I 100% agree that there should be a staff member assigned as the permanent liaison to this committee. I just wonder why, since the committee is, the ad hoc committee talked about the provision of public safety services quite a bit, and they talked about some other issues, why the public safety director isn't the person who is the permanent liaison to this rather than the town manager.
Because the public safety director works for me.
Yes.
Because the public safety director has a lot on their plate.
Everybody
Because
does.
I have an internal
Mhm.
management, DEI management team that includes the public safety director, the library director, and the assistant manager because of the IT and communications functions. I think it would be a step out of our box ultimately council's call, but a step out of the box to assign a specific staff person other than the town manager to staff a council created committee. So we have an appeals board.
Mhm.
I have elected to have the town attorney staff the appeals board because of the potential conflict in that. But in the ordinance, you haven't said that. I could be
Right.
sitting there staffing.
Hmm.
Right now, I am the lead in the DEI work.
Right.
And so it's kind of internally. So it feels kind of like asking the code officer to staff the planning board when we have a planner.
Mhm.
That's what it, and I don't, again, I am not bucking for another job. I really am not. But when I think about it kind of that way, right now, this work has primary importance. And it sits in my office with assistance from an incredibly talented, very busy core team of senior staffers. But ultimately, I'm the one that's leading it.
Tom
Well,
wanted to say
I
something.
hear what you're saying. I hear what you're
Yeah.
saying.
I can be convinced, but I gotta think about it.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna ditto that right back to you.
Tom, you wanted to say something?
I think I'm all set. I'm convinced. I think it should be the manager staffing it.
So actually, Jeff, could you say, I actually, when you first made your statement, I was with you. So can you, and then we had all this conversation. So can you say again your thoughts about this, the staffing and
Yeah, okay, yeah, briefly, because I don't wanna, I think Sophie addressed it, but what I was thinking is, within the JEDI committee or DEI committee, we hope that there's a free and unrestrained discussion of the issues that they want to discuss, right? And that some of those issues are going to maybe in opposition to decisions that the town manager has to make in their role as the chief civil rights officer of the town. And so my fear is that having the person who has that role also be the liaison to the committee may kind of stifle some of the discussion that committee is going to have, not intentionally, right? But just by the presence of having that institutional power sitting, in observation of that committee, it may not allow that committee to discuss freely what it really feels are the issues of the day. And, I guess the reason I'm thinking this is because we've talked about the difference between equality and equity. And what I've learned is that equity is, equity has to be individualized. And if we have a process which is uniform, right? All our processes as a town have to be uniform. But then we're striving for equity, which is, in a sense, disuniform or ununiform, however you say that, right? Because some people need a higher box to stand on than other people, right? Those are two kind of separate things. I don't know, maybe I'm not explaining it correctly, but I think Sophie did a very good job describing operationally why it's good to have the town manager there. I just have to think about it a little bit more.
well, I appreciate that perspective. I also hear what Sophie's saying, which is that she has many hats she wears, and she already, I don't know how she does everything she does in the time she has. So this would be adding another place she has to be to her list. But the one possibility, and I thank you, Jeff, for describing that equity piece, because as I said about being triggered, when you're in a position where something is very challenging to communicate, then you want this organization that we're creating, this committee, to be welcoming and to be a place where people feel safe. And so maybe the way to go about this is to assume we would staff it. But how about an application that opens it up to town employees, similar to the way other members are selected? And so that they would apply to be the staff person who did this job. And of course, they're going to, as every staff person, they work for Sophie, and they would be in regular communication with Sophie about the job. And sometimes that would be the best person from the staff standpoint would be our town manager, and other times there might be some other person that would be a really good fit for this committee.
So I understand, I hear what you're saying, Jeff. But when I take all of these factors into account and I think about the ad hoc committee process, I still believe that we did that committee a disservice by having them operate essentially in a vacuum. They probably, it was good to get the broadest scope of recommendations that they might give us, but they were clearly, hobbled in some way by the fact that they don't have any operational knowledge or institutional knowledge of the town, how it functions, what's legal and what's not legal, what we can and can't do, what we have done already, what's in progress. The operations and the institutional knowledge of the town was almost completely absent to them by our design. And I believe that that was a mistake. And that while we did get a lot of great recommendations out of that process, we also got a lot of recommendations that were, based on the foundation of not having knowledge or access to knowledge. And that was our design. And I don't think that it was the right choice. They were sort of working in the dark. And the last thing I want to do is set this committee up to a similar process where they're kind of fumbling in the dark, doing the things that they think they should do, but also not having that basis of institutional knowledge or operational knowledge, or institutional history, I mean. And so for me, when I think about the person who is best poised to provide that information, it's our town manager, because I think also, think of a council meeting. We are elected people who are in charge of a lot of things for this town, but we need Sophie and her senior staff members to sit with us and walk us through what is legal, what is possible, what is part of municipal purview, what has been done in the past and what we're looking to do in the future or might already be in process. That is the role of staff. And the other component that's really important about staff in general, and Sophie in particular as our manager, is a complete and utter neutrality. That regardless of whatever staff might think about what's the best path for council to take, they do not lead us in a direction. They give us all of the information. They might go as far as to say, here's what would happen that might be bad if you choose option C. But in general, we are presented with the information, all of the choices, and we make decisions as a council. That's the same kind of guidance that I would want this committee to have, where they are completely free to have whatever discussions they want to have. We do for sure, and say what needs to be said and hash it out. But there is a staff member there with that guidance, to provide that guidance, to say that's actually not legal, or we did do that and it was a disaster, but you can still recommend it if you want. Or and I know at the end of the day, I think what it comes down to is trusting the person that we've hired to be our town manager to operate in a professional, neutral capacity, which she has always demonstrated across the board that she's capable of. And so so for me, it seems like a no-brainer that we should have Sophie or senior staff, providing that guidance to this committee.
Yeah, and I also too, just to add to that, it scared me a little bit to hear that conversation, because I don't want to see this committee as being adversarial, that we can't say what we need to say. It's all going to be public anyway. So whatever you're discussing, is going to be, the public is going to be able to hear and see and be there, but this shouldn't be an adversarial committee. This shouldn't be an us against them. This should be a committee that is, like Megan said, or even Sophie said, that's interwoven into the fabric. I mean, otherwise it would be a disaster. I don't chair a committee that says we have to do this, you know, to save the environment. I chair a committee that looks at all the options, and I mean, if you're looking at a kind of an outside the box kind of thing, and you know, staff will bring stuff to us and we will discuss other things, but it's not adversarial in any way, shape, or form. So
I get what Jeff is saying. I truly do. I don't know if I agree with it, but I get it. And I just wonder if part of the committee charge can delineate what staff's role is. Because there are times that staff brings stuff, and I don't want people to think we all agree with what council decides. It's our job to support and move forward with what council decides. And I don't think it's a personal thing. I don't think it's about Belle and the role she has, or Jeff Lowe. I think it's that we have professional people because that is the job description. But I also understand that so much of what we're talking about is around perception and what people perceive, right? And I see it with new counselors not wanting to offend, taking an awful lot of time to not offend staff when it takes a lot to offend staff. So I wonder if we could look at in the charge very clearly what staff's role is. And business is business, and it shouldn't be personal is actually part of our senior staff mission. So to think about how I can weave that in, Jeff, maybe let me try it my way and see if I can convince you.
Yeah, that's fine. I think
Good idea.
kind of clarity of language would be great.
And if you have ideas, I would be totally open. And if at the end of the day, you look at it and say, this isn't addressing my concern, I'm still concerned about X or Y, then we should talk about it again.
Yeah.
Is that?
Sounds good.
Are you giving up or do you agree?
No, I agree that I would like to see some language. I think that's great.
All right.
Great. So actually for me, I want to echo what Megan said. I think, you know, through this whole thing, making sure that we set this committee up and with the right tools and exactly what we want to have done is important. You know, I mean, I think that a lot of times people don't really get the information, and I know that Sophie's the one who's always in the middle of this. Because she knows all this stuff and she's been working on that. I mean, it was like even at committee night or candidate night when we were like, I had to spend some time explaining where we're at, what was going on, what we have, and some candidates didn't really realize that. So it's important of us to make sure that we get that to them, that they know exactly where we're at any given point. So if you're going to work on that part to convince Jeff, and then yes, Lori, you're muted.
I just have a point of clarification, which Megan said that, you know, of course, everyone gets to be heard and we never have any problems, or I don't know, I should have written down exactly what you said, but there was something that you said about, you know, that we're all able to communicate. And,
No, that's not what I said. Please don't
all
go
right.
off on a tangent about something that is misconstruing what I said. Please, please. I'm asking very nicely. Please don't do that. That's not what I said. Would you like me to say it, or?
Sure, go ahead.
I just said that we have spirited discussions. That's all. That's what I was saying. We have lively, spirited discussions. That's it.
I think there was a place in which you mentioned that everyone felt comfortable, but I don't always feel comfortable on this committee, and I don't always feel heard. And So when
Well,
discussing,
Lori, I hope that I've been trying my best to make sure I see your hand every time it's there.
oh, no, not, I mean, again, I'm experiencing, talking about my experience, as I said, I'm
Okay.
experiencing a time of being triggered where I remember things that happened in the past, and it's a little hard for me to disconnect the things that are being said now from my experience over time. So my experience over time being on the council hasn't always been where I felt that what I had to say was listened to, so for example, even just what happened right now, which is I asked Jeff for clarification and made a comment, and then Megan responded to Jeff and did not respond to the comment I made as if it hadn't been said. So, and I think that we run the risk, and we're all white here. And we all, as I mentioned before, we all have a certain amount of privilege and education. And, I think that we run the risk of, when we assume because we're comfortable that other people would be comfortable, that we are missing what the goal of this committee is, which is to make a place where people can help inform us of how we could do better. And so that's really an important thing to keep in mind, that the people we're inviting to be on this committee are going to be advisors to the council on how the council can do better. And to assume that it's all fine misses the point that maybe it's not always fine, even if some people feel fine.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to, are we on the how does the committee integrate within the current organizational structure? Do the committee recommendations advance a specific item to the Community Development Committee, council workshop, or directly to council meeting for further consideration? We had a few items on this. Thoughts from councilors?
I think it could go to either workshop or community development committee. I guess I don't think it should go directly to our monthly council meeting.
I would agree with you on that. I feel like it should go to a committee meeting first, and then go from there as needed. I don't know what any other thoughts are on that.
I only wouldn't say like community development specifically, because there are just because, how do I say this? Just because it's a JEDI committee doesn't mean it's automatically going to be community development. I mean, there could be issues around how we allocate funds that might be relevant. And so that should be a finance committee decision.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Or like zoning, which would be my committee. I mean, so I think that either the workshop or the fact that we have the all committee process going right now means that it could find whatever the item is, it could find its home in the appropriate committee, or we could just refer it to a council workshop.
I think they actually said really good about, since we are doing joint committees now, if we continue that road, that would be so much easier to be able to place it where it specifically needs to be placed. Any other thoughts?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and we've really limited workshops. For a while, when it was once a month committees and trying to get everybody all together, we were really creating this other whole workshop process that, if you've noticed, we've really dialed that back quite a bit. So I like it would just be referred to a committee or workshop, and then we can, but the general idea being, what I'm hearing from council is you don't want to open up your monthly formal council meeting with an order that you haven't vetted, which is in keeping with the way we do everything else here.
Yes, I agree. Any other thoughts on that from anybody? Okay, let's move on then to how are the committee work plan and meeting agendas developed? Thoughts?
Would it be helpful if I told you why I put that question on this?
Yes.
That would be helpful.
So right now, the manager's office or the town planner, in the case of the planning board, really drive the whole agenda setting process, right? The council tells me what your general work plan is, we kind of agree on a path, and then I might work with committee chairs around kind of a path forward with specific agenda items. But a lot of the time, you guys are really relying on me to create items and bring them forward. I think by the way you answered the first question, it would seem to me that while staff, and I think it makes sense that we utilize our internal agenda posting notice process, where staff is kind of creating, even now with the environment committee, the agendas, and they go out through a uniform way, that this committee appears to kind of have multiple information flows. So maybe the answer is that the staff person meets with the committee chair a couple weeks before the meeting is scheduled, talks about the items coming in front of it, and create the agenda together, much like the environment committee is doing. So you're getting the issues that staff would like to have considered, also bringing any council issues through staff where they normally would come, but that it is not like, Bell doesn't tell you what your agenda is going to be. It's a collaborative effort, and
Right.
everybody gets kind of made.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
But I think in order for me to get there, I had to know what you envisioned for the first piece, which I think is pretty clear.
Makes sense.
Makes sense to me too. Any other thoughts from people?
No.
No.
Okay, we'll move on. E, is this an evergreen committee? Will it sunset at a date certain, or will it be given an established shorter term, 1 to 2 years, with check-ins to evaluate the process and accomplishments? Thoughts? No one?
I think we kind of talked earlier about about it being a 2-year committee with an opportunity to review it at the end of each of those 2 years, and to make sure that the charge doesn't need to be modified, adjusted, or any of the other factors that affect it need to be looked at.
Yeah, I think proceeding in a way kind of similar to the environment committee, where, you know, it's like you might, the key, I'm the one who wrote the thing about the key to this work is that we need to stay flexible. And so what we need to do is we need to meet a particular need. And we're creating something out of the ether now, thinking that we're making the best plan, but ultimately through the process, that might not be the best plan, and we might need to be flexible. So I would favor either within the first year or 2 years, doing kind of a comprehensive check-in with the members of the committee, you know, and with staff. Is this functioning? Are there things we need to tweak? Do we need to dial in the charge? Do we need to change the way that the committee functions? To make sure that it can be responsive, because the last thing, literally the last thing in the world that I want is for this committee to follow down the same path as so many committees littered all over the country that were created in a groundswell of let's do something right now, and then they're dormant and they don't do anything. I don't want that. And that's been my goal from day one. I do not want that to happen to this committee. So making sure that we either within the first year or 2 years check in to make sure that if there's anything we need to adjust to make it more functional, more robust, that we do that. I would see it as an evergreen committee. I don't favor like this is a trial period and then maybe this committee will go away. I don't favor that model at all. But I definitely believe that there needs to be kind of like a come together, reevaluate what changes do we need to make to be even more effective going forward.
I think time is important here because the things that you're asking this committee to do are not identify, solve, move on, identify, solve, move on. And as you have seen here, from identifying an issue to figuring out how to integrate the solution into policies, ordinances, whatever, takes time. And one of the things you will see through the budget that you guys are going to get in just a couple of months is me consistently saying, we can do this well, we can do it fast, or we can do it cheap, pick two. And my sense of working for this committee is that we want to do things well, and we want to do them cheap. And fast is kind of where we've fallen down. And so I would think you'd want a good amount of time, understanding that every year, perhaps that report back from the group, either annually or biannually, a formal report where you might tweak charges, which we do. But I do think that this group is going to need time in order to affect change. And everything I'm seeing through Society for Human Resource Managers and other municipal places tell us that in order to truly make change and to build a culture, we need to move the needle. And moving the needle means small incremental steps, and that takes time. And when you consider that where we have been with all of our municipal thoughts, whether it's service delivery or how we train employees or what the message is we're supposed to be blind and treat everybody equally. And what we're seeing is we don't want to be blind, and we don't want to treat people equally. We want everybody to have the equitable service, right? And that's going to take tweaking and getting buy-in and moving things forward and identifying and tweaking. So I think you want time. So I just be careful if you think that this is going to be a ton of meaningful change just with a snap of a finger. I think this is a longer committee that needs to get woven into kind of the fabric of what we do.
You know, we've talked about this before, saying that there's like I know people want that big home run, but the reality is to have effective change, it's going to take time. And I agree that it's going to be, I'm thinking more like a 2-year committee, but to make thought of check-ins, I agree with that completely. Is it a quarterly part of our council meeting once a quarter that we kind of look at it and see where we're at just as a normal item on it? Not sure. But I think it is going to be one of those things that we're going to have to keep our finger on the pulse with that.
I think too that the culture changes and shifts so that we do have to have some time. Because it is, I think we talked about this the last time, whatever we do has to be a living document. It has to shift and change with whatever is happening in our society or our culture, and who knows what's going to be happening in a year or 2 or 4.
Jeff, do you have any thoughts?
No, I really appreciate the idea that it's going to be a multi-year process. This is, and that we need to give the people who sit on the committee time to do their work. Yeah, 100% with that.
So, Sophie, do you need like a definitive right now of? I mean, you don't. Okay.
So what I am hearing, and I asked that question because there have been in Orono's history, those three different models of we're creating a committee, that committee is always going to be here. The Trails Committee, it's a Trails Committee, it's always going to be here. It might change what it does or how we kind of tweak it, but we create that with the idea it's going to be here for a long time. You have created committees, not maybe the individuals here right now, but the council has created committees that have a specific sunset provision in them. Not my favorite, because they exist on paper, and then when people want to use them, they have formally been, and oftentimes they're not even off the ground, and then they're done. If things are time limited, I think you need to tell people ahead of time. So what I'm hearing is you want to create a committee, and let's kind of create a way to get on the committee with some staggered terms so that as it rotates through, we're not losing everybody at once, with some formal check-ins. I would wonder if a formal check-in, maybe kind of the way you bring people, you onboard people, where we do evaluations in rapid succession when we're first rolling it out, but then it becomes less, right? So maybe we do quarterly when we first start, but then roll it into a biannual, maybe a informal check-in at a committee, and then a formal report once a year or something like that. So because they're also going to have tasks that should be working through the committee structure. So
Right.
just a thought.
No, I like that idea. Great. Any other thoughts on this?
No.
Okay, let's go on to reviewing the ad hoc committee and staff reports, as well as the matrix and toolkit provided. What areas do you see as recommendations that are in alignment with the town's current efforts? Thoughts on this?
It just seems that these two items seem more operational, Sophie, so these might not fit into the grand charter, that's right.
No, this was, and I don't know if this is where you guys would like to break, but I thought I had two kind of marching orders from council. One was to help guide you through the process of creating a charge. And then the other was this idea of a formal DEI plan or priorities, because I would think that your plan and priorities would kind of help guide the committee, at least to start. And so, as an example, one of the things that would be helpful from an operations standpoint is right now, the town is not, we don't throw a lot of parties, we don't celebrate a lot of things. We're being out of the box, we've got our birthday celebration that we started a couple years ago, and we have some community events, but we don't tend to celebrate a lot of other things, right? If you look at the ad hoc committee's charge, there's a lot in there about celebrations and acknowledgements. And if council wanted to move in that direction in developing a plan, we'd want to think about how to support that. That's all. I'm kind of trying to get a sense of what you think the priorities should be for a plan moving forward. And I'm kind of thinking about like what Boulder, Colorado, and some of the Portland, Oregon, some of the big cities have done, but try to right size it, because I don't think that we can do a matrix of 100 goals for the next year. I think we need to kind of pick and choose. So I was just looking to try to get some feedback from council about kind of, are we on the right place with kind of where staff is going? Does it already align with a lot of the committee's recommendations? Are there places that you want us to to look at what the committee has recommended and give you some goals for how we could reach that. Do you want to kick it back to the committee? Are there things that you see that the committee has suggested, but they're, while important, not municipal in nature, and therefore we should kind of set them aside? Or I'm just trying to, I was trying to walk you through helping me set priorities for the plan. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems like there was a lot of overlap in the responses in this whole section. Not just A, but the whole question 2. The recommendations that are in alignment with the town's current efforts, I think we're pretty well versed on that with the matrix that you drew up for us in terms of what's already underway, and we have been involved in some of these initiatives. So it didn't seem like there was a lot of sort of discrepancy in that answer to me. Most of the first half of the recommendations seem to be like things that are already kind of part of our ongoing process. The ones that should be priorities that are not part of the current efforts seem to be things that are on the radar but haven't quite gotten off the ground yet, like creating an inclusive policy that supports current handicap parking spaces, which staff is recommending that we hire a consultant to do that. And that is something that we might consider. And then the other 2 options were to kind of, in different ways, acknowledge both the history of town land and Chief Orono and the relationship with the nation, the Penobscot Nation, but also using town signage, which we've kind of been talking about, in terms of highlighting language and history, and how can, if we were going to have signage around town that was giving the history of parts of Orono, instead of simply looking at the history of the people who colonized Orono, but also the history of what the land was before it was colonized, as well, we've discussed. It seemed to me, looking through all of the feedback here, that there's a lot of kind of wanting to engage more thoughtfully with Wabanaki history, with our relationship to the Penobscot Nation in terms of how we organize ourselves as a town. I was really interested in the answers to the potential stakeholders that should be included in the town's efforts, but may not really be like at the forefront of people's minds, one of which being business owners, and another being organizations that service or advocate for low-income individuals and families. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? No?
So can I ask just 2 questions from an operational standpoint? I don't know if everybody has noticed, but the message at the end of every council meeting agenda has changed. And instead of the legally required ADA notice, it now explains that people who need assistance to participate in or receive town services or participate in the meeting should contact the town manager's office, and it gives kind of that information. And then it also goes on to say that the town is an equal opportunity employer and service provider. So is that enough in council's mind to kind of be the midpoint between providing an ASL interpreter and
Mhm.
languages, language interpreters at this idea of the universal accommodation versus as you need it accommodation. If that, so like, is that, that's my attempt to balance the budget and the need. And so like, that is an operational response. For right now, are you good with that?
Can I ask a question? Does, and I've never seen this before, so I don't know,
Mhm.
does Zoom have the capacity, or Facebook, or however we stream, to close caption?
YouTube does.
YouTube
So
does.
what happens is the closed caption happens after we post our meetings on
Okay,
YouTube.
but not during. or,
Not
I
during.
don't see how it could actually, if it was live, yeah.
Well, what you can do is hire somebody to transcribe it as people talk, and you can get closed caption. It's expensive, but it's
Yeah.
possible. So I guess one of the things that, as we work through the charge and the plan, the other thing that would be kind of helpful is to get some feedback on the lift that has already been done in an effort to try to meet some of these things. Like, I have not put the land acknowledgement on the draft. You guys next week are gonna see a draft letterhead and new signage mock-ups that have been done by the company so that they can be printed. Because evidently Bell and Mitch do amazing work, but it's not work that can just show up on a sign. But is that keeps coming up over and over and over again. I think about operationally the space I need and the fact that people only want one page often for a letter. But if that's important, then we should weave that in. I've seen it in multiple places. That would be helpful for me to kind of understand too, and to maybe think about that when we bring the mock-up back to folks.
Sophie, to respond to the question about like, is that line to contact the town manager's office, like, is that okay? I want to answer that question like yes and no, because asking for an accommodation is a barrier. And having to reach out and take the initiative to request a specific accommodation is in and of itself not equitable. We know, I mean, the research shows this, we know this. However, we simply, I mean, we absolutely cannot afford to have an ASL interpreter present at every meeting, or to hire a closed captioning service that will, I mean, like this is the issue. So, and I think this, for me, it connects to the final part of question 2, which is the items or issues that are not currently addressed in the materials provided that you believe should be part of the town's DEI initiative. And I will be transparent and say that I'm the only one who responded to this question. So that paragraph is me saying that I think that the council and the community have to have a frank discussion about the budget. And this was reflected in the candidates' night speeches or conversations as well. Many candidates advocated for wanting more. The town should do more, but yet the service level should also stay high. The amenities that the community wants should also stay high, except we need to lower taxes. And this is something we hear from the community a lot. And I'm not making a judgment about people wanting these things. I want all the things too. I want all of those things. But the fact of the matter is that we cannot add more things to the budget and also lower taxes without money coming from somewhere. So I think that there needs to be a bigger conversation with council and with community members. If we talk about the pool, we'll have lots of impassioned people showing up to say, open that pool, put that $30,000 in the budget and open that pool. Well, then, like, we also can't hire an ASL interpreter. Maybe we would be better off curtailing some community amenities and funding a position for a permanent DEI director. But these are all conversations that really need to be had in a frank way that aren't being had. I think what's happening is we're hearing from the public that they want lots of things, but they also don't want to pay higher taxes. And I understand that too, neither do I. So we're kind of getting to a breaking point. We were already at a breaking point just funding operations with the very low property tax base that we have in this town, since only half of the town is taxed, so land-wise. So again, I just want to repeat, like, I think that note at the bottom of the agendas is good enough for what we can afford to do now. And if we want to, but it's a good example for me for the ways in which, if we wanted to address these issues the way that they should be addressed, where we know that having to ask for an accommodation is a barrier, then we would need to put our money where our mouth is. Nobody's yet interested in putting the money where their mouth is. And so that's a much bigger conversation that ties into the budget. And I just want to say that, not to open up a debate about it, but just to say, I think that's something we need to be thinking about and that the community needs to be thinking about. So good enough for now, but maybe part of a larger problem with some of the things that we're trying to do and the changes we're trying to make while balancing a budget.
Anything else?
Megan, maybe we could, since we do have a budget coming up, budget season is coming up, maybe we could make some space at that time. If it's necessary.
Yeah, I would just love to have the community more engaged in the budget process so that they can really see, like,
Yeah.
we're not just throwing money around willy-nilly and wasting it on stuff. I mean, we're scraping every penny together to provide the quality of life that people enjoy in Orono. And when we talk about adding more to that, we have to be realistic about where that money is coming from. And if your values are, well, we need to invest money in our ethics. If a budget is an ethical document, then we maybe have to say, okay, then I'm willing to pay a bunch more money in my taxes every year to make sure that I can afford that. Or maybe that isn't what people want. So I think that I really, really want the public to be more engaged in the budget process.
And
I think, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and if they would be more engaged, it just so happens that the manager's budget has a whole discussion item on DEI and how much money we want to spend.
There we go.
You know, it's funny is that, and I'm glad that Meg, that you made that point, is that, I mean, I'm hearing it even out in the public. You know, there's the thing about, like, you know, there's always that taxes. I'm gonna. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And the reality is when you're on council, then you realize. I remember back in my first year, when you get hit in the head with, like, the realities of what you have to work with within a community that wants to be having the best, it's not an easy thing to do. And I think it is important that the public take the time, even people who are, like, trying to learn more about government, to really understand what we're working with here.
And I certainly appreciate the comments that you made, Megan, and I really agree with them. Having more public participation is something that nobody would argue against. However, we're still going to have the difficult decision-making as the decision makers, because you're not going to get unanimity from the public on almost any issue. And I think we all know that.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have enough to bring you back a couple of draft documents in a bit, not like next week, but in a few weeks.
Yep. Good.
That work?
Yeah.
So, do we have anything else on?
We have a town manager's report, I guess.
Yes, so over the last year, I have brought up during, I think, just about every meeting that we have discussed the financial statements or the budget reports, that the fire department is on schedule to go over budget. And I sat down because we had yet another person go out on long-term medical leave. And I looked at what, I'm just trying to pull up what I sent folks. I looked at what we had, kind of what we've already expended, and then also what we are projecting. So this represents the chief, which he did a few weeks ago, saying putting a formal spending freeze on the department. So we would argue everything we asked for, we need. Council has most definitely told us not to put wish items in annual budgets. So so what he's done is, it's now, if you don't need it right this minute, we are not gonna get it. And based on the overtime for, now we're covering 2 full-time absences, long-term absences. Overtime, we're anticipating another $129,000 of overtime, and that's spread through unscheduled overtime, vacation coverage, and sick coverage. We are the retirement and FICA associated with that. Our workers' compensation bill, which comes in January and December, for January through December of each year, has come in. We have our first payment due, and we are looking at about a $10,000 overage. Part of that has to do with the comp rate, which we've talked about in the fire department. And then the other part is also when we added the shift for additional staffing. That is a formula that's payroll and experience. So we got hit twice there. So at the end of the day, we are looking at an overage right now that we're estimating will be about 10% or $239,000. I am going through the process of looking at where we might be able to curb expenditures at this point. This is a fairly large overage in the department, so I don't know that I will have budget adjustments that will meet this, but I'll have more information. But you know, I don't like to run in the red without making sure everybody is fully aware that this might mean that we end the year, if not maybe in the gray or maybe in the light pink, but just want to make sure people were aware. And we're also aware that Jeff, so you're going to see things in the budget next year where, like, we have stopped all of the emergency management efforts that we normally would be undertaking this time of year. We're just not going to, we're not going to do it because it is not absolutely necessary. But you'll see that there will be items that we're not, you know, budget items that we are not expending, but we will still need next year. Okay, it's the first one. The second item is the housing committee report, which I gave everybody access to, was the basis for a housing bill that was printed last week. I attended an MMA meeting where we talked at length about potential impacts of that bill. There are some things in that bill that might be of concern to the community and impact the community. Also of concern about that bill is just, I think the concept is one that council would 100% get behind around affordable housing. I think creating affordable housing is really important to the town council and our community. I just, as working through the bill, I think there might be some unintended consequences here. As I work through this, I will hope to get some a bulleted list out to counselors so that you can kind of see what my concerns might be, and we might be able to talk about it next week. The thing I am concerned about is this seems to be, although as of last Thursday, there's no the public hearing on the bill hadn't been scheduled. What I've been told is that the intent is for this to be passed before the legislature adjourns in April. So this is pretty fast tracked. I don't want to get out in front of the council, but I also think that if there are potential impacts on the community, we should let community members know, because the other feedback I've received is that municipalities and municipal government are not seen by this current legislature as valid contributors to this process.
The MMA is not in support of this bill.
No, the MMA is going to oppose the bill. So, and what was really difficult when we had the conversation is that there wasn't one person in the room that opposed the idea of working towards finding affordable housing. And unfortunately, that seems to be the way this is kind of lining up, is if you don't agree with the bill, you don't support affordable housing. And so instead of taking a position on the bill at this point, I think we need to kind of instead turn our attention to what might the unintended consequences of this be. If you increase density throughout the community, what does that mean for, without consideration of public infrastructure and stuff like that? What does that mean? And I'll have a better sense. This is just really, really fast in a very, very busy time. So we'll try to have a sense, and I don't want to get out in front of council with this, but
My sense of it is that it would be a loss of local control, is what I have read and heard. Okay.
I think that
Anything else?
it's very similar to what Megan said, that, you know, if you ask anyone, even the people that were running for office, the majority will say that they want taxes not to increase, but in fact to run the town, but they also want things to be done to improve. And so the money would have to come from somewhere, or you'd have to have a tax increase. In the same way with affordable housing, you ask everyone, and pretty much everyone would agree we need affordable housing, but that's been something that has been agreed upon for a long time. But with the current tools that we have, it has not occurred. And so actually this, you said that the legislature is, you know, not listening to municipalities and not working with the MMA, but in fact, the legislature made a working group on housing that included all different stakeholders and has changed this bill in response to input from MMA. And the last I heard from the Housing Caucus is that MMA was neither for nor against. So this is new to hear that MMA is against this bill. And the bill was with those stakeholders trying to come up with the tools to address the housing problems that we have across the state. And one of the problems is that local control ends up with every single town saying, well, I believe in affordable housing, but just not here. And that ends up that there's no place to put it if every town says not here. So this is a state way to address this problem. So.
Is there any more? Do you have any more report?
No,
Sophie?
we've got a full agenda next Monday, multiple committees. I've heard from 4 counselors about the audit. Based on that, I'm assuming that everybody who has an audit, everybody has an audit in whatever form they wanted it. One is priority mail to you, Tom.
Yep,
And
thank you.
Cheryl, you have yours, and everybody else has it electronically. And we will do the presentation of the audit next week in
Great.
hopes that you will feel like you can adopt it in March so that we can get ready to do it all over again.
Sounds good. Are we ready to adjourn?
That's not a me question. That's a
Are
you
we ready
question.
to adjourn?
Yes.
I don't think we need a motion in committee.
All right.
All right.
Meeting.
Have a good
Meeting.
night.
Thanks all.
Night.